Good afternoon and welcome back to Gulfstream Park. Welcome back to Gulfstream today. I'm Gabby Gaudette, joined by Andy Serling here to take a look at this 10-race program this afternoon. It's a beautiful day in South Florida as well. It had a little bit of rain early yesterday, but it really cleared up nicely. And today, a couple of rail change settings here today, but overall on the turf, fast and firm.
Well, we got extremely fortunate with the rain yesterday, especially considering what they had predicted. And we can always use a little bit of rain for the turf, but as you say, today is just a beautiful day.
Beautiful day indeed. We'll take a look at our featured wagers and our carryovers today. In race 1, we do have a carryover in that rolling super high 5, always a fun bet, and that carryover is over $5,000 to start us off. That also does start off the early 50-cent pick 5 in race 1. As we get into race 5 on the 10-race program, does kick off the 20-cent rainbow pick 6, and that carryover continues to grow over $168,000 today. As we get into race 6, the 50-cent late pick 5 as well, and an interesting sequence, I think. Perhaps earlier on the card might be a little bit chalky, but in the latter half of the card, there's definitely a couple singles that you could use.
Yeah, and also I think you're going to want to spread in the last race. I know in the pick 5 I made, I used 5 horses in the last race because it does feel like a last race, which not. The favorites are and they can win, but they're not wholly reliable. I agree. I thought earlier I didn't go that strong in some of the races. In fact, we could probably put that pick 5 ticket up to start out the first race. I'm going to use 2 horses in here, the 1 and 7. I know you and I disagree in this first race. You're more interested in the 10, who we'll get to. Using 2 and 3 races, 4 in the third race, and 3 horses to close it out. And we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping that, I have logical horses, but I have enough backups that if I can get smart in 1 to 2 races and maybe beat one of the shorter prices, chance to make a little money.
Okay, well, let's take a look at the first race to kick us off. This maiden $25,000 event on the turf course at 5 furlongs, the rail setting at 24 feet. And the 10, Dreaming of Ava, this is going to be my top selection. We'll actually go back and take a look at her debut performance. And yeah, she is coming off of a significant layoff since June, so she has that to kind of overcome today. But I thought this was visually a very good race when she debuted at the 5 furlongs. And you can see her just kind of closing off the pace, picking up the pieces. But not only that, in the beginning half of the race, coming out of the gate, she broke very sharply, and the rider took her back from off the pace as there were kind of several different horses in front of her. And I just really liked her energy coming down the stretch. She really didn't have any encouragement other than a hand ride. There was really no whipping, either left-handed or right-handed. So Edgar Zayas does pick up the mount. So she does have to obviously overcome the layoff and overcome that outside post position, but she's clearly better at 5 furlongs than the mile where she went last time out.
Yeah, and she also dueled last time out. It wasn't a particularly strong race, but she dueled in the race going a mile, which worked against her, broke through the gate. I wasn't a big fan of her chances and saw that race a little differently than you, but obviously she can win. And listen, I'm sort of chalking out. Now, I'm curious. You also have a trainer stat, I think, for Michael Petro with your horse you want to talk about?
We do. We have a trainer stat quickly for trainer Michael Petro over the past 2 years. Maiden claimers, turf sprints here at Gulfstream alone. He wins at 27%. But oddly enough, a negative ROI still there, primarily because I don't know. I want to get your thoughts on that. He is 27% and 80% in the money. The statistics alone are very sharp there.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's running short-priced horses. They're hitting the board. And 80%, maybe he's overachieving by 2 horses, but he's running horses at short prices, as he frequently does because of these Frank Calabrese horses, and they go up short prices. So the fact that he's won with 4 of 15, it seems a little random to me. I wouldn't want to say he's dramatically underachieving, but I don't think those numbers demonstrate he's overachieving by any stretch. I don't know. I just thought this was a horse that could win the race. I wasn't thrilled. I left this horse out. You left the 7 out. I thought Glass of Wine. I didn't think I was covering any special ground. This horse finished 3rd, lost by a little over length to your horse, Little Snip, who came back and won a couple of races, as you had said. Blame Dixie was a drop-down horse that was probably better than these, and I just thought it was a logical horse. You seem to be a little against this horse.
I'm not against her by any means. She would be one that I would definitely use in the pick 5 because she's obviously my 4th selection here for Dave Fox. But again, visually, I didn't think it was the sharpest of races, but she is coming out of a key race. Blame Dixie was dropping in from Maiden Special Weight Company at Saratoga. Little Slip, she's been in good company as well. I couldn't, again, same with the 10, Dreaming of Ava. I think Glass of Wine is one that could definitely win, but I'm not over the moon about her. There are some other horses in here that definitely figure too. The one, Idealism, is one that you use in the exacta, and she very well could gun it from the rail. She has a lot of natural speed.
Yeah, I mean, she looks to be the speed, in this field, and I expect her to be the main speed. Listen, her first race is going to make her tough in here, and she's running against maiden special. I think the question with her is, why is she dropping down? Now, maybe there isn't as extreme a difference between some of the maiden specials and a maiden claiming race in these turf sprints, so perhaps that's it. And she obviously ran poorly last time, but she was chasing a very, very fast pace last time out, and I think she's a super logical horse. I don't think there's anything clever about her.
I really like her in here as well. The 3 Cavalia is one I'll use too. She had to, again, she was one that had to face Little Snip too, so she's coming out of a key race as well, but the blinkers go on, and she drew from the way outside post position, and it almost looked like last time out she wasn't fast enough to get a nice clear early position, so they had to take her back from off the pace from that outside post today. With blinkers on, I think they might be a little bit more aggressive in her placement.
All right.
We'll take a look at race 2 for this maiden 12,500, going to the main track at 7 furlongs. And this is kind of a tough race to really have a solid opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously saw this race basically the same way. The 8 Go Salvatore Go will probably be the favorite. It's Javier Castellano. And listen, it is a significant rider change to get Javier from the prior rider. There's no doubt about it. But I think what for me, and I don't know if you agree or not, and obviously I want to use them both, I prefer the 5 in there because I just thought you'd get a little bit of a better price, and they're betting the 8 because of Javier. And in the meantime, this horse has only won designated dirt race, albeit against better. It was a disaster. And the last time was a wet track off the turf, whereas a horse like the 5, at least last time it was a scheduled dirt race, and I thought the horse ran fine here, also gets a rider change.
I agree. There's much more dirt form here. You're going to get a better price. I'm very leery of picking the 8 Go Salvatore Go on here, so Hugatone is one that is one that I'll use primarily because, okay, yes, he was bumped a little bit. He was shuffled coming out of the gate. I don't think it necessarily had an outcome on the race. But as you said, looking at his previous dirt form against upper level maiden claimers, perhaps that back class or anywhere near it could show up today.
Right. It's not as though his last race came out of nowhere. His early races were fast enough to win.
All right, we'll take a look at race 3, this maiden 12,500 condition on the main track at 7 furlongs. And this is another one, and I'm glad that you brought up these statistics because I found the same ones on the 5, Not My Circus, and the 6, Midnight Dance. These 2 first-time starters, primarily because that the race is weak, probably will get well bet.
They have to get bet. And listen, they might run 1-2 here. We're just showing these stats, and we'll show both of them for Not My Circus and Midnight Dance as food for thought. Not to tell you this horse can't win, but once again, Michael Petron, you saw those high percentage stats, low ROI, but high percentage. His first-time starters, he just hasn't been winning with them, and it's not as though he's picked it up over the last year. He's just 1 for 8 over the last year. So it's not like since he started training for Calabrese, he's done better. And Mike Maker, these numbers just aren't that good. And overall, Mike Maker's a trainer who has great numbers in the turf and mediocre numbers in the dirt.
Well, it's clear that these kind of conditions aren't these 2 trainers' strong suits. They're much better at Michael Petro, obviously very good trainer on the dirt with claimers, perhaps not first-time starter maiden claimers, and Not My Circus Midnight Dance, Mike Maker, much better on the turf. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. The 4 Arco de Triunfo is one who will show speed and probably will be the fastest early, and I'm just hoping he can go gate to wire here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, for my pick 5, I'm using all of the 4, 5, 6, and 7. I don't think there's any way you can have extreme confidence in the 4. We just sort of ended up in this horse by default because we didn't want to take the firsters on top, but neither one of us can be shocked when the firsters run 1-2 in here.
Exactly. The 7, very tricky, is one that I would definitely use in the early pick 5 as well because there's the unknown factor, and this horse could definitely show up on the dirt.
Right, absolutely.
We'll take a look at the race 4 here, 12,500 non-winners, a 2 lifetime condition, 6.5 furlongs out on the main track, and the 1 Arella Princess is going to be your favorite on the drop in class from that $30,000 level, and I land on her. I respect her. Her last 2 races were not scintillating. There was nothing scintillating about her performances. So she is dropping in class and kind of a question mark here. But the two fillies that beat her last time out were much the best. Series Song, visually impressive. Buckskin Doll was dropping in class for Todd Pletcher. So again, I think she's the one to beat.
She's not much horse, Buckskin Doll. I'm familiar with her from New York. But as you say, yeah, her last race is a funny race because she broke about a length slow and she angled 2, 3, 4 wide in the turn. She was wide in the stretch. I still thought she kind of hung for second. But as you say, there were better horses. So the question is whether or not you want to take an alternative. And I do want to take the 8 My Little Darlings here, who looks like the controlling speed in the race. I found a trainer stat for trainer Jane Sibeli that I thought was very formidable. Her numbers going turf to dirt in claiming races are extraordinarily strong. She's very good overall turf to dirt, but even better when she's doing it in claiming races. Those are powerful numbers, and this horse almost can't help but have the lead in this race, and I'm hoping she wires the field.
And you look at her back main track races as well, and if she can duplicate anything that she was running earlier this year on the main track, she very well could win this.
And she's also a horse that's done very good running on the dirt at Gulfstream. She seems to prefer Gulfstream's track, so that was a positive for her, and I'm just hoping loose is enough.
She very well could be overlooked in here. The 2 Responsive, I didn't really know what to do with. That 5-furlong sprint at Tampa was not strong by any means. The winner was nice. She was actually decently bet against Allowance Optional Claiming Company. She could be one to just pick up the pieces. You opt for the 7 Perpetual Novena.
Yeah, well, she's got 1.5 dirt races that give her a little bit of a chance, and I thought she might get herself in reasonable position early.
All right, well, with that said, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the 20-cent Rainbow Pick 6. That carryover continues to grow. We'll talk about it right after this. Welcome back to Gulfstream today. Taking a look at the 20-cent Rainbow Pick 6. It does start in the 5th race on today's 10-race program. That carry over $168,000, over $168,000. And we'll take a look at the sequence here. I did construct a little ticket for you, $72, using 5 horses to start it off. Quite frankly, Andy, I really don't like this race, primarily because a lot of horses are coming out of the same race with Treble Trip. So
my problem is I'm betting a horse that I've lost money on so many times is starting to get ridiculous. I think I've lost more money than the horse is worth, but we'll get to that later. You're going to single. I see the favorite in the next race, and it seems like a logical single, though there may be some alternatives, but a tough horse to go against.
And I agree with you. I thought that was the more logical single on the card. You could perhaps single on Gap Year later in the day, but I kind of have a little bit more confidence in Deep Sea. So singling on Deep Sea in race 6, using 3 horses in race 7, 2 in race 8, and then rounding it off there. Using 4 horses in the final leg. You and I were speaking about this as well. I think you have to use at least 4 or 5 horses in the final leg of the sequence. We'll talk about race 5 to kick us off, though. 5 furlongs on the turf course, and you land on the 9. Love Dakota style. Your Sky, you are going to stick with her one more time.
Yeah, well, we'll show the last race, and she comes out of a race that quite a few of these horses came out of, but she is clearly the one I think you want out of there. Now, she's the gray with those sort of purplish blue silks that she's caught behind horses, and watch her. She's got a ton of run and nowhere to go. The hole closes up badly there. It kind of opens up again there at this point, but there's nowhere for her to go, and she can't get through, and you can see the rider just literally can't ride at this point, and even now he's barely riding. I think there's an argument that she could have won. The problem is she's 1 for 19. She's piled up a lot of excuses, and she's just a kind of horse that seems to find some trouble, but she does have an outside post. It seems like it'll be a fair pace. I don't think she's going to get any blazing pace up front, but I'm going to hope today she breaks through. But I've tried her before, and I've been disappointed, but she should have won last time.
And the tricky thing about those races, though, and about races and trips, it doesn't always pan out as we hope it to, especially because he could have very well won that last race because of the Treble Trip, but he very well could not put in the same type of performance today.
Exactly. These horses are 1 for 19 for a reason. It means that they don't show up with any kind of consistency in their races, and I don't know if you can rely on it. I'm very curious as to what you saw about Remember Richie that you liked about this horse, unless you just thought it was sort of a new face. I didn't think this horse ran well at all in the race we just looked at.
Well, obviously this is a horse, again, who Grand the Man went went onto the front end. This horse was kind of just sitting from off the pace and not a very good performance. Got into a little bit of trouble and then but just kind of packed it up in the final couple of strides. However, today I do think that he's got a different strategy, perhaps under Luis Saez, to maybe sit a more patient trip and just stalk from some of the leaders. Grand the Man is obviously going to go to the lead today. We have a newcomer with the 3 Awesome Union in here. Who knows what the Black Jet's going to do as well. So I hope it pans out for him again. I think he's consistent at this level. Obviously, he was dropping in from the 30,000, but this is what makes this race so tricky, is that you could go to any other horse in this race. The interesting one, the 5 Lakota Warrior, I really didn't know what to do with this horse. Corey Lannery on for Ronnie Warner. The lone turf sprint that this horse ever ran was against Fast Anna at 32 to 1.
Yeah, I know. The horse did no running that day whatsoever, but I don't disagree. It was a better field. I didn't particularly like that horse. I didn't see your horse, remembering Richie, just because I felt like the horses had chances here. Black Jet seems to be the horse that you have to be really scared of in this race, because obviously Black Jet can beat this field based on the last turf sprint at 5 furlongs, but that was a while ago, and this is a sudden drop off of the layoff, and I don't know how you can trust this horse.
It's not a very confident move. Any of this horse's previous turf sprints would tower over the rest of the field. So the question is, why off since February? Now coming out of a new barn, immediately drops to the $16,000 tag. Suspicious, but I don't think one that you can leave off your ticket.
No, absolutely. You have to use this horse protectively, as you say. The last 2 turf races especially will blow this field out of the water.
We'll move on to race 6 on the card, maiden special weight, 6.5 furlongs on the main track. And we have the likes of the 4 Deep Sea, who is obviously could be a legitimate single in the pick 6, but I'm interested to see your approach on the late pick 5.
Well, we'll look at my pick 5, and then we'll take a look at Deep Sea's last race at Churchill, where I think we both felt he ran fine. I am going to have some backing with Princeps Senatus, who we'll get to it here. And I'm going 2 by 3, by 3, by 2, by 5, a $90 play. I just feel like if you can get to the last race, you want to have coverage in there, as I don't think these are easy races. It does seem like there's logical horses in here, but I don't think they have to win. And we'll start out with Deep Sea in the race at Churchill Downs last time. I don't have any knock on this horse's race. I thought it was a very good effort, Gabby.
Yeah, taking a look at the top of the stretch, this horse is down on the inside and dueling against the eventual winner here. But again, I had nothing against this horse. I thought it was a long drive. He just kind of got a little bit tired in the latter half of the stretch. Not to mention, the winner of the race, Blazing Prospector, actually went on to technically win the next race at the fairgrounds, was disqualified and placed second. But a 90 Beyer speed figure for that race coming out. So obviously, this race did produce a couple of maiden special weight next out winners, too, so it seemed to be a pretty strong race.
I agree. I thought it was a very, very live race, and I don't think there's any way that you can really... The only reason you might want to be, if you were against this horse, which we're not, is to say, well, I want to see it transfer its Churchill form, but that doesn't seem to be a real problem for the Cassies. Now, Princess Senatus, I think, is very, very dangerous, because Josie Carroll has extremely good numbers going synthetic to dirt, and this horse has a real prep. I mean, to run this horse off an 8+ month layoff, going a mile and a 16th, had sort of tightener written all over it. And if you look at this horse, the only time it's run on a dry track, it ran a 76 Beyer. It ran a race that, on any figs you look at, comes up very comparable to Deep Sea's races. So maybe this is just a horse that needs a dry track. And if that's the case, this horse is a dangerous horse for a dangerous trainer.
I need to go back and double check, but I do believe that that was a particular day at Laurel where we did see the Beyer speed figures a little bit higher on that day in comparison to kind of how the horses kind of exited outside of that day, that race. Causeworthy he's an okay horse. He's nothing special. I mean, he's consistent at the maiden special weight level. So we'll see if he can duplicate that race. But again, if he can, he should be very tough. The weird horse to me too is the number 2, Raffadane here for trainer Kieran McLaughlin. They debuted this horse on the turf, really didn't pick up his feet. They've obviously given him time since then, and now bringing back to the main track, and he does actually post some pretty decent workouts at Palm Meadows.
This isn't really Kieran's. Kieran's moves more dirt to turf. You know, the dam is a half to more than real, who won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Philly Turf Race for Bobby Flay and Todd Pletcher a number of years ago. I didn't know what to do with this horse. I think there's other weird horses. Gray Glory seems a little bit interesting to me in here. I don't know if this horse can really run, but thought this horse was way, way back last time and actually made a little bit of a run during the running in there. They're fringe players. The problem is they're not running against a bad maiden field with Deep Sea in here.
Exactly. I completely agree with you there. So backing yourself up with the 3 for the first leg of the pick 5 with the 4. And as we move on to race 7, we'll get to this maiden $50,000 event. A mile on the turf, rail sitting at 24 feet. Scratch the 5 Trick City, who initially was my top selection. So by default, I do land on your top selection, the 7 Triquita for trainer Todd Pletcher.
That was very fortuitous scratch for you. That may have been your biggest break so far at the meet. It really
very sad.
Todd Pletcher. How about this stat? I'm amazed at how many stats you find with good ROIs for Todd, and not because his horses get bet. This is strong. Maiden special, maiden claimer on the turf at Gulfstream. He's done very, very well. And any way you look at it, even not at Gulfstream, he's 32% with a 258 ROI. He delivers with these horses. I don't think this horse ran great, but I still think it's probably a race that makes him the horse to beat regardless.
I agree with you, and you and I have tried to go against his horses plenty of times here so far on dirt and turf, and to our peril, actually. So the barn has just been doing so well. Javier Castellano, there are a lot of things to like about this horse, but there are also some other players in here. The 6 Walloping Win is a horse that you use. Eddie Pliza tries to get this horse to the turf, but she's by Include out of a mare who's primarily dirt. So kind of tricky there.
Well, she was actually second in her only turf start with an 83 buyer, so there isn't an abundance of, this is a first foal, and there's only one turf winner in the second generation, but I think there's turf in it. As you say, he wanted to run this horse on turf. I think she's dangerous. Look, we saw the race pretty much the same way. Citizen by Day in her one turf race, that's the 3 Citizen by Day, ran against much, much better horses. And, the 4th finisher in that race was Module, who came back here and ran a very big 3rd with a tough trip over the weekend, a stake. So that's a pretty live field. Price to Perfection, obviously, was a tough luck second in there. So that's a live race, and I think that horse is dangerous for Jimmy, who won a race yesterday, Jimmy Toner.
Exactly, and paid $30 in the first leg of the pick 6, too. So if you get a decent price on the 3 Citizen by Day, I really like this horse too. The race produced some pretty key horses that went on to exit and run and keep very good form outside of that one maiden special weight. We'll move on to the 8th race on the card, an allowance optional claiming event going a mile and an 1/8 on the turf course, rail set at 96 feet. And we do have the likes of the 8 Gap Year here for Kieran McLaughlin, 7-2. You go back to her previous 2 turf distance.
Well, look at one of them.
Races. We'll actually go back and look at one. The most recent one, on the 7th of September here at Saratoga.
She got an absolutely perfect trip in this race. I think the problem with Gap Year potentially is the distance. Are we absolutely sure that she's going to get better with more ground? Now, what's in her favor is this was a very firm turf course at Saratoga. She's catching a firm turf course down here. So she's going to like the going. I thought she ran well behind Zarkava, who was promising, even though it didn't really develop, for Chad Brown. Nothing wrong with her turf races. She seems pretty good. A mile and an 1/8 is maybe, it's the question. It doesn't mean she can't handle it.
Yeah, it's a question. I think she probably could if she can reserve a little bit more energy. She is coming off of a layoff since the Valley View, where she again had kind of a horrible trip in that performance as well. But Zarkova, again, I agree with you. That was a very sharp performance behind Zarkova when she debuted on the turf. Zarkova just hasn't panned out since then. Again, the distance, I really like her in here, but if you try to beat her, I think a viable option would be the 4 Bishop's Pond, who really hasn't done much wrong except her last race over the yielding going at Aqueduct.
The other thing about Bishop's Pond is she's a plotter. You can dismiss her last race. It was a paceless race, yielding going, as you say, and it was so aberrationally bad. She's better, but she is a bit of a plotter. And you look at her in Gap Year, and if you feel like, let's say you decide they have relatively similar talent, yes, Bishop's Pond's going to handle the distance, but she's at such a disadvantage because Gap Year tactically is going to likely be towards the front end, probably maybe 5 Hearts show some speed in here with the 9 scratched, whereas Bishop's Pond can be a real victim of pace.
I absolutely agree. The 10 Owls Gal is an interesting one. I went back and watched the replay at Churchill, and again, an okay performance, but you go back and watch the stretch run of Owls Gal's last race, and she really had no hope coming down the stretch. She was squeezed out of position just a few strides out from the wire, and she was beaten just over a length against what I thought was pretty solid company. I'm not saying she could probably win this race, but I think an option to maybe throw into some exotic. She comes in with very consistent turf form, and she had a tremendous amount of excuses in her last race.
Yeah, I thought that Gitsy's Rocket was sort of, she's my Owl's Gal in here, the other horse that I'm going to throw in, because she did not like the softer turf last time, a race where you had that slow pace, and she just didn't seem to handle it. Now, she was very much with the track on September 7th when she saved ground in a day at a time period here in Saratoga, where you really need to be inside in those turf courses. But I still thought she ran reasonably well, and she seemed to be an improving horse for Barclay Tagg. I thought she might fit in here.
Okay, race 8, a very nice race on today's card. We'll move on to the 9th race, a maiden $35,000 event. 6 furlongs onto the main track. Scratch the 1 and the 4 in here. And the 7, Scarlet Goddess. This is an interesting one for me, but again, I actually land on her as a top selection. I kind of liked her last race where she did show speed against maiden $50,000 company, but this is a race that we've seen yesterday. We'll see it tomorrow. There are a couple of class droppers in here, and it really is up to who shows up today.
Yeah, Scarlet Goddess, I don't love her, but doesn't she just feel like the best horse who she's facing? I don't think it's anything clever. I just think she's better than the horses she's running against. Unless you think Liberty Lunch is going to run better than her debut. I thought Liberty Lunch, the 8, was a little dressed up off that debut, and you seem to agree. You had her nowhere, where she got second because the other horses were doing no running, and it was a bunch of horses in the photo for second.
Yeah, I don't know. This is one of the trickier races. I thought you do see in back late surge. You go back and watch that race, and maybe she can be a little bit better positioned in the short field and with a little bit more experience here today. But it does look like it might be the 7 Scarlet Goddess's race to lose.
Right. It feels like she's a fair pace. She'll be sitting outside a first girl in here, and she's a logical horse. Obviously, the horse you and I have in second, she's my backup in the pick 5. I imagine you probably used her in the pick 6 as well, because Majestic Delight, he got a horse going out for Ralph Nix. His numbers are fairly neutral with his first-time stars in the Dirt and Maiden Claimers, but it seems like everything he's running is running well down here.
Yeah, everything he's running is running well, and he teams up with Tyler Gaffleone, where they bat at near 30% when they team up together. And obviously, Ralph Nix always good with his maidens, especially younger maidens like this 3-year-old filly by Majestic Warrior. So one that figures, probably one you don't want to throw out of the Maltese as well. We'll go on to the 10th and final race on the card. Nice maiden special weight going out to the turf course at 1 mile and 3/16. Rail set at 96 feet. And the 1, Amoni, I couldn't land on, but again, look, class-wise, she does look like she should be very tough in here.
Yeah, you've got a negative stat on Gary Contessa, and it's very, very reasonable, where Gary's had no success in maiden special turf routes down here, with only 2 of them hitting the board. I didn't look. What kind of prices were these horses?
Like mediocre prices, quite frankly, like probably 5 to 1 to long shots, nothing that have been short prices. And this horse is actually coming into this race with pretty decent form against much better company, and this could be one that definitely figures that bucks the trend.
Yeah, I thought that she was compromised in her last start by a ridiculously slow pace set by Soki in there. It was early in the meet, the turf was pretty firm, and she was just waltzing along on the front end, giving the closers no chance, whereas in this race, it feels like Amoni is going to be close to the lead. The 12 felt like the other horse with speed. The 12 is scratched in here, and I think with the inside post, this horse could be in a position where she can run a much, much different race, and I still think she ran well enough. She's contender. I don't love her chances in here. She's one of a bunch of horses, and as we take a look at Hudson River Gal's last race, she's a horse that both you and I have second. Looking at her last race, she's starting to look like a horse that's just going to find somebody to beat her every time she runs, even though she's probably the favorite and the horse to beat.
Yeah, you look at this performance, and she really had a dream trip. She saved ground from that inside post position the entire way. Took her a little bit of time, a couple strides coming out of the turn to really switch gears there, switch her leads. And again, she could win this. There wasn't much follow through. I thought even the 3rd place finisher had more of an excuse in there.
That's the Forever Together you were talking about, right? That was the Michael Matz, the older Forever Together. I agree. She can win, but there's nothing about her last race that made me feel like, well, you know, she's going to be better today, right? And the horse you have on top, I'm not sure what to do with her, but man, she's got pedigree. 1 mile and 3/16 first-time starter, though.
It's tough, and I did kind of dive into some of the statistics with Christophe Clement with debuting horses at these particular distance, and not very strong statistics, so I didn't even put them up. But this could be kind of the horse who's very well bred that actually shows up at first asking because nobody else is strong enough to win. You even look at this filly's breeding, Warfront, out of a very nice mare, again, kind of European turf breeding, and I'm just banking on the fact that this, with hopes that this horse can show up at first asking.
Well, this horse is really bred to go long. The dam won the Long Island at 1.5 miles at Aqueduct, so she's a distance horse, which is obviously why Christophe doesn't mind running long. And Chad Brown does a great job with his first-time stars on the turf. So does Christoph. Christoph is sensational as a trainer. So if she has talent, he has a ready. And I can't believe he's going to run her to mile and 3/16 and embarrass himself. Because if he runs her in here and she can't really get the distance, I mean, maybe she's just not very good. That's always a possibility. But if she has some talent, I think Christoph will have her ready to do it, and she's found the right feel because horses like the 1 and 4 are okay, but they're not exactly superstars.
I agree. Now, looking at the rest of the field, though, how do you cover yourself in the final leg of the sequence? I only could afford to use 4 horses in here. I threw in the 7 Magical Empire here for Ralph Nix, who followed home an okay winner last time out, but second time out of the barn, second time off the layoff. If this horse takes a step forward, gets back into the low 70 buyer speed figures, she very well she could pull this off too.
I agree, and she probably appreciate the extra quarter mile from her last race. As you say, coming off a layoff, she's absolutely on my tickets. It's not as though the 1 and 4 inspire confidence where a horse like Magical Empire had her chances. But the other thing is, Magical Empire, for the most part, has been bigger prices in those races as well. I thought the 5 Villa Savoy is an interesting horse for Tom Albertrani. I know this horse was 80 to 1 in its lone turf race last February, but you're still talking about a dam, Tout Charmant, who was a sensational turf runner. And you look at that race overall, the winner was a pretty good horse for Todd, who I think ran second in the Belmont Oaks, actually, behind Lady Eli in a subsequent start. This horse just got completely lost during the running of the race, and I'm willing to give her another chance as a bomb to throw her in.
These are the types of bombs that you won in the pick 6 and in the pick 5 as well. So you might be onto something there with the 5 Villa Savoy. And with that said, that's races 1 through 10 and some really good races in the latter half of the card. I really do like the pick 6 and the late pick 5 here as well. Beautiful weather to enjoy here, South Florida, and a great card indeed. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back for races 1 through 10. But first, Larry Colmus is up next with Scratches and Changes. Good luck.